At 68, when most people were planning slow mornings and quiet evenings, Margaret Hale found herself standing at the edge of a new beginning. She had spent more than 30 years working as a school librarian in a modest town where children came and went like seasons. Some stayed long enough to grow familiar, others disappeared without warning. Among them were the foster children, the ones who arrived with thin files, guarded eyes, and stories no one fully explained. Margaret had always noticed them. She noticed the way they avoided talking about home. She noticed how they flinched when adults raised their voices. She noticed how some carried their belongings in plastic bags instead of backpacks. She never asked questions that would embarrass them, but she offered safe corners in the library, soft chairs and shelves filled with stories about brave heroes who survived impossible odds. After retirement, the silence of her small house felt heavier than she expected. The ticking clock sounded louder. The mornings stretched endlessly. She tried gardening, she tried baking, she tried joining a book club, yet something inside her felt unsettled, as if a chapter of her life had ended without a proper conclusion. One evening at a community fundraiser, she overheard two social workers discussing foster children who were about to age out of the system. They spoke about teenagers turning 18 with no family, no stable housing, and no guidance. One of them said quietly that many would struggle with homelessness, unemployment, and loneliness within months. The words stayed with Margaret long after the event ended. She lay awake that night, remembering Daniel, a boy who once spent every lunch hour drawing houses in the library. When she had asked him why he loved drawing homes, he answered, "Because I do not get to stay in one." That memory felt like a whisper calling her forward. The next morning, Margaret picked up the phone and contacted the local child welfare office. She asked how she could help. The woman on the line sounded surprised but grateful. They needed volunteers. They needed advocates. They needed adults willing to stand beside children in courtrooms and meetings. Margaret signed up for training without hesitation. The training sessions were intense. She learned about trauma, attachment disruption, legal processes, and the complicated pathways children traveled through foster care. She listened to stories that left her heart aching. Yet she also felt something awakening inside her, a sense of purpose stronger than anything she had known before. When she attended her first court hearing, she sat quietly in the back, observing. The room felt formal and intimidating. Paper shuffled, lawyers spoke in technical language. A young boy sat between two adults staring at the floor. His future was being discussed as if he were invisible. Margaret felt a steady determination rise within her. She promised herself that no child she represented would feel unseen. Her first assigned case was a 14-year-old girl named Tasha, who'd moved through 6 different foster homes. Tasha rarely spoke. She kept her arms crossed and her eyes distant. During their first meeting, Margaret did not ask about her past. Instead, she asked about her favorite music and whether she preferred mornings or nights. Tasha looked confused, but answered softly. Week after week, Margaret showed up. She attended school meetings, she reviewed reports, she asked social workers difficult questions, she wrote careful notes, she made sure Tasha understood every decision being made. Slowly, trust began to grow. Margaret realized that advocacy was not about dramatic speeches. It was about consistency. It was about standing in the gap when systems became overwhelming. It was about reminding professionals that behind every file was a human heart. As months passed, Margaret became known for her thorough preparation. Judges respected her calm presence, social workers appreciated her clarity, foster parents valued her balanced perspective. But most importantly, children began to look for her in the courtroom. She was no longer simply a retired librarian. She was becoming a voice. Margaret soon discovered that advocacy extended far beyond court hearings. Each child carried layers of pain that could not be resolved through paperwork alone. She began visiting foster homes, listening to teenagers describe their fears about aging out. Many worried about where they would live after 18. Some feared becoming burdens. Others believed independence meant facing the world completely alone. Margaret refused to accept that narrative. She started researching community resources. She visited housing agencies, employment centers, and local colleges. She asked questions until she understood every available program. When she encountered barriers, she wrote letters requesting clarification and improvement. Her home office slowly transformed into a command center filled with folders, charts, and handwritten notes. She treated every case as if preparing for an important exam, because in her mind, the stakes were even higher. One evening, Tasha admitted she wanted to attend community college, but doubted she could afford it. Margaret spent hours exploring scholarship options specifically for former foster youth. She discovered grants that social workers had overlooked. The following week, she presented the information during a planning meeting, ensuring that Tasha received guidance on applications. For the first time, Tasha allowed herself to imagine a future shaped by choice rather than circumstance. Margaret also began organizing small gatherings for foster teens approaching adulthood. She invited guest speakers who had once been in the system and successfully built stable lives. These meetings were informal, filled with pizza, laughter, and honest conversation. The teenagers asked questions about rent, taxes, jobs, and relationships. Margaret watched as hope flickered where fear once dominated. Her efforts attracted attention within the community. Local churches offered meeting spaces, businesses donated clothing for job interviews, volunteers stepped forward to mentor specific youths. What began as one woman showing up evolved into a growing network of support. Yet the work was not without heartbreak. Some cases ended with outcomes beyond her control. Some children were reunited with families that still struggled. Others moved away, losing contact with her entirely. Each loss weighed heavily on her heart. During moments of discouragement, she reminded herself that even temporary stability mattered. Even 1 year of consistent advocacy could alter a life trajectory. Her age continued to surprise people. Many assumed she would tire quickly. Instead, she displayed remarkable stamina. She attended morning meetings, afternoon school conferences, and evening community forums. She spoke firmly but respectfully, advocating for extended support services beyond 18. When asked why she worked so tirelessly, she answered, "Because childhood does not end at 18, and neither should compassion." Her words began appearing in local newsletters. Community leaders invited her to speak about the realities facing foster youth. She described not statistics, but stories. She spoke of dreams interrupted and resilience reborn. She emphasized that these young people were not broken, but underserved. By the end of her second year as an advocate, Margaret had represented dozens of children. Each name, each face etched itself into her memory. She kept every thank you note tucked inside a wooden box beside her desk. She no longer felt restless in retirement. She felt essential. As Margaret gained experience, she recognized patterns within the system that demanded broader change. Individual advocacy mattered deeply, yet structural gaps continued to push many youths toward instability. She decided to expand her efforts beyond single cases. She began collaborating with other court-appointed special advocates, forming discussion groups to share strategies and identify recurring obstacles. Together, they documented concerns regarding housing shortages, mental health access, and educational continuity. Margaret drafted a proposal outlining community-based transitional housing, specifically designed for foster youth aging out. She presented the concept during a town council meeting. Her voice remained steady as she explained how stable housing significantly reduced homelessness and unemployment among former foster children. The proposal sparked conversation. Some questioned funding, others doubted feasibility. Margaret listened carefully, addressing each concern with research and compassion. She reminded officials that investment in prevention cost less than crisis intervention. Momentum slowly built. Local donors expressed interest, a retired contractor offered renovation services, A small foundation pledged seed funding. Margaret coordinated meetings, aligning volunteers with resources. Her living room, once quiet, now buzzed with planning sessions and hopeful brainstorming. Meanwhile, her relationship with Tasha deepened. Tasha enrolled in community college, studying social work. Inspired by Margaret's example, she expressed a desire to support children who felt unheard. Watching this transformation filled Margaret with profound gratitude. Not every journey unfolded smoothly. One 17-year-old, named Marcus, struggled with anger and distrust. He skipped meetings and dismissed her guidance. Instead of withdrawing, Margaret persisted. She attended his basketball games and congratulated him sincerely. Gradually, Marcus realized her commitment was genuine. On the day Marcus secured his first part-time job, he called Margaret before anyone else. His voice carried pride and disbelief. She listened, smiling through tears, knowing that small victories signaled significant shifts. The transitional housing project eventually secured an abandoned building, requiring extensive renovation. Volunteers worked tirelessly, painting walls, repairing plumbing, installing furniture. Margaret supervised logistics, ensuring safety standards were met. When the first resident moved in, Margaret stood quietly observing. The room was modest, yet clean and secure. For that young adult, it represented dignity and opportunity. Word spread quickly. Media outlets featured the initiative, highlighting the 70-year-old advocate leading change. Instead of seeking recognition, Margaret redirected attention toward the youths themselves. She insisted their resilience deserved celebration. Through every milestone, she maintained humility, attributing success to collective effort. Yet those around her understood that without her determination, the project might never have materialized. Margaret had evolved from volunteer to community catalyst. With the housing program established, Margaret turned her focus toward policy reform. She researched state legislation concerning extended foster care benefits, discovering inconsistencies that left many youths unsupported. She began drafting letters to lawmakers, sharing first-hand observations from courtrooms and mentoring sessions. Her writing blended empathy with evidence. She avoided blame, emphasizing collaboration and shared responsibility. Several representatives responded, requesting meetings. Surprised but prepared, Margaret traveled to the state capitol, accompanied by two former foster youths who wished to share their experiences. Inside government offices, she spoke clearly, describing the gap between legal adulthood and emotional readiness. She advocated for extended financial assistance, educational grants, and structured mentorship programs beyond 18. The discussions were complex, yet productive. Committees agreed to review proposals and consider amendments. Though legislative change moved slowly, Margaret remained patient. She understood systemic transformation required persistence. Back home, the housing program flourished. Residents participated in life skills workshops, budgeting classes, and career counseling. Volunteers hosted weekly dinners, creating a sense of family. Many youths who once anticipated isolation now experienced belonging. Margaret continued mentoring individually. She celebrated birthdays, attended graduations, and offered guidance during setbacks. When one resident relapsed into destructive habits, she responded not with disappointment, but renewed support, reinforcing that mistakes did not erase worth. Her health occasionally reminded her of age. Fatigue visited more frequently, yet she refused to retreat. She adjusted her schedule, delegating tasks to trusted volunteers, ensuring sustainability beyond her direct involvement. Community members began to refer to her affectionately as the grandmother of the forgotten. Though she smiled at the title, she knew her role was not to replace families, but to ensure systems treated children with dignity. One evening, during a community celebration honoring volunteers, Tasha approached the podium unexpectedly. She described arriving in foster care feeling invisible. She spoke about meeting a woman who showed up consistently, listened without judgment, and believed fiercely in her potential. As applause filled the room, Margaret felt tears slip silently down her cheeks, not from pride, but from profound connection. She realized her greatest achievement was not buildings or policies, but restored belief. Years passed, and Margaret reached 75. Her steps slowed slightly, yet her resolve remained unshaken. The transitional housing program expanded to multiple units, serving dozens annually. Legislation supporting extended care gained approval, providing additional stability for countless youths across the state. Former foster children returned as mentors, creating a cycle of empowerment that extended beyond Margaret's initial vision. Marcus enrolled in vocational training, eventually becoming a certified electrician. He volunteered to maintain the housing facilities, refusing payment, saying, "This is my way of giving back." Tasha graduated with honors and accepted a position within Child Protective Services, determined to advocate from inside the system. She often credited Margaret for teaching her that one steady voice could challenge silence. On a crisp autumn morning, the courthouse organized a small ceremony recognizing Margaret's years of service. Judges, social workers, volunteers, and former foster youths gathered, filling the room with warmth. When invited to speak, Margaret approached the podium slowly. She looked at the faces before her, each representing resilience, struggle, and triumph. She spoke without notes. She said, "These children were never statistics. They were stories still unfolding. They needed presence more than pity, opportunity more than sympathy, consistency more than promises." She thanked the community for proving that compassion could outgrow bureaucracy. She reminded everyone that age was not a boundary, but a resource. Wisdom, patience, and courage matured over time and could be invested in change. As applause echoed, she felt a quiet peace settle within her. The restlessness that once haunted retirement had transformed into fulfillment beyond expectation. Later that evening, Margaret sat alone in her living room, surrounded by letters, photographs, and memories. She reflected on the moment she overheard social workers discussing forgotten youths. That single conversation had redirected her life. She understood that beginning at 68 had not been late. It had been precisely on time. Her journey demonstrated that purpose does not expire, service does not depend on youth, influence does not require fame. Because she chose to listen, because she chose to stand, because she chose to speak, forgotten foster children found an advocate, a community found direction, and Margaret Hale found the truest chapter of her life.